the discovery of radioactivity. A little bit of chemistry history. Radioactivity was discovered in 1896 by Antoine-Henri Becquerel. Phosphorescence had been observed. That's a greenish glow. You're probably familiar with it in terms of glow-in-the-dark t-shirts and toys and things like that. While we were up at that primitive cabin one year, there's an outhouse, and you had to walk past this rotten old stump. And it's dark because we don't have any electricity. Nobody for miles around has electricity. So you're walking out to the outhouse, and you see this thing glowing in the woods, and it's kind of creepy. And we realized that the wood was rotting, and as it rotted, it was phosphorescing. And so it was glowing green for most of the night, kind of creepy. But that's phosphorescence. And so Becquerel was trying to figure out what this stuff is, and his hypothesis was that it was associated with the emission of X-rays. Now, X-rays had been discovered, but his theory was that the two of these happened together. So what he did was he exposed potassium uranyl sulfate crystals. These are a crystal that was known to phosphoresce, exposed it to sunlight, and then placed them on a covered photographic plate. So he's got a photographic plate that was covered with black fabric so that the light wouldn't expose it. And then he caused these crystals to phosphoresce by putting them in the sunlight and then sticking them on the plate. Well, he found that there was a dark exposure where the crystals had been. And he's like, awesome, this is supporting my hypothesis that it's the phosphorescence that is causing the crystals to expose this plate. They knew that X-rays did this to photographic film. So he published this and presented it to the French Academy of the Sciences and everything. And then later he found out that those dark exposure spots formed when the crystals hadn't been exposed to the light. If you had the covered up film and the crystals in a drawer, it would still expose the film. So obviously the sunlight bit was not part of what was exposing the film. And that realization caused him to hypothesize that the crystals themselves were emitting something. It's a particularly obnoxious and unusual sounding train. And because this was uranyl sulfate crystals, he called these uranic rays. But that was the first radioactivity, the emission spontaneously from a substance.
So things naturally can be radioactive without doing anything to them?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. In fact, most radioactive things are radioactive just because that's how they are, not because we did anything to them. You've probably heard of Marie Curie. She was actually one of the first women in France to pursue doctoral work. And she discovered two new elements. She was looking for other substances that also emitted these uranic rays that Becquerel had discovered. So she found two elements that did this. She named one of them polonium, because she was originally from Poland, and the other was named radium, because of its high level of radioactivity. Now, in popular culture, in the movies and stuff, radioactive things glow, right? They glow in the dark. And that's not actually really true most of the time, but it is true for radium. Radium is so radioactive that it does glow in the dark, and it emits heat. So what is really a bit disturbing is that I remember when we used to have watches like this that glowed in the dark, and they had radium on them. And we were wearing them on our wrists. It just doesn't seem like a real good idea now. So Marie Curie discovered these two new elements. And because these rays were now obviously not specific to anything containing uranium, she changed the name to radioactivity. So called radioactivity instead of just uranic rays. 1903, The Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Becquerel, Marie Curie, and her husband Pierre for the discovery of radioactivity. And then a few years later, in 1911, Marie also received the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for discovering those two new elements. And this is a picture of her with her two daughters. I don't know that the kids were irradiated, but the parents definitely were, and their lives were not as long as they should have been.